Yep. We see appeal, appeal, appeal as the MO often when it comes to Donald Trump. Lisa, if you just take a step back, I mean, that's one case, one hearing we'll be keeping our eye on. But you and I were talking, this administration is already facing 45 lawsuits, and a lot of judges are taking action across the board. What kind of test is the judicial system facing right now?
Maybe the most critical of our lifetime. Because, Anna, our democracy depends on courts being able to enforce and interpret the law. If, when you have people like Vice President Vance dancing very close to the line to saying judicial orders need not be followed, if we get to that point and the executive stops following judicial orders, there is no more control or constraints around the executive. We have a country at that point where we see Congress increasingly abdicating its own responsibility to push back against this power grab by the executive. And if the executive is not going to listen to orders of the court, even, for example, if one of these issues percolates up to the Supreme Court, then there are no guardrails. You have what used to be three coordinate branches of government turned into effectively one with nothing to stop it.
We don't see Congress pushing back either, as Republicans are controlling both the Senate as well as the House. Ken Delanian and Lisa Rubin, guys, thank you both very much. And joining us now is Norm Eisen, State Democracy Fund Chair, former special counsel and special assistant to President Obama. He was also an advisor to the impeachment managers during Trump's first impeachment. Norm, it's good to have you with us. What's your reaction to what we're hearing from the president and the vice president about how they see their executive powers?
Anna, I don't think the courts or the American people are going to let the vice president, the president, Mr. Musk, who's an administration official, who's also suggested that the courts may not need to be followed or judges may need to be unlawfully removed. He said that in one of his tweets earlier today. I don't think they're going to get away with that. What you're seeing is a shock and awe assault on the foundations of our democracy with all of these unconstitutional and illegal actions, and a responding shock and awe by my group and our allies and many others, going to court and securing these orders, stopping them. I won orders last week, the very first case locking Mr. Musk out of the Treasury Department. He has no right to look at that data. Tying the hands of the president, the attorney general, and others who want to dox, reveal the identity of 6,000 FBI agents. They don't have any legal right to do that under the Privacy Act and otherwise. We're in court this morning arguing that Donald Trump's birthright citizenship, rewriting the Constitution, he gets to pick and choose who are citizens of the United States. No, we're in a courtroom right now with our allies fighting that. And we filed a brief on behalf of Anna, almost 24 conservatives. Every presidential administration, from Nixon to Trump's first administration, saying, of course, this offer to force federal employees out without the permission of Congress, illegal. So, and that case will be heard today. We've been involved in many of these cases, and they're going to lose.
Well, let me pick up on that last one you just mentioned, the case in Massachusetts that will be heard today. And you write in the amicus brief that you filed with a group of 22 Republicans, quote, "This case comes at a critical moment in our nation's history when a new presidential administration seeks to expand its powers in relation to Congress. At the same time, it invites the federal courts to remove longstanding checks and balances under the law." Do you have confidence the courts will be that check?
Anna, I do. We've seen already the courage of the men and women of the federal judiciary standing up to Donald Trump. The vice president and others may speculate about defying court orders, but if they do, they're going to find an American political leadership and the American people from the grass tops to the grassroots. When I was preparing our Treasury order last week, Anna, we're getting ready to go to court. A spontaneous demonstration erupted, peaceful, in front of the Treasury. Political leaders from Congress and ordinary folks. So we know from other countries when the courts are backed by the people They're able to oust autocracies. So I have confidence. We'll see what happens at the Supreme Court. But even this Supreme Court is not going to want to see their orders thwarted. That's the most fundamental principle. And I think American democracy is responding strongly, meeting shock and awe with shock and awe. I think we'll see success in the fork in the road case today in Boston. And I don't think the American people are going to let Trump, Vance, and Musk get away with defying court orders.
But seriously, though, what happens if this administration defies the courts and just ignores their order? I mean, you talk about protests, but who holds them really accountable? Do you see the court issuing a contempt order and the U.S. Marshals taking action?
I do. I think that the courts will start with civil contempt. They'll move to criminal contempt. They have broader sanctions. They're going to rule against the administration in that case. I think the Supreme Court will back them up. And Anna, look, the ultimate guarantee of a democracy is the people of that democracy peacefully exercising their will. The United States is not unique. We've seen autocratic regimes try to do this before.
I want to bring in NBC's Garrett Haake, who's at the White House. Mark McKinnon was an advisor to President George W. Bush and John McCain, as well as creator of The Circus. And Joyce Vance is a former U.S. attorney, professor at the University of Alabama School of Law, and MSNBC legal analyst. So, Joyce, what is exactly in this order, and what is the practical impact?
Well, this is a very brief order from the judge in Rhode Island saying, look, government, it appears to me based on the evidence that's been put in front of me by the collective states attorneys general, who are the plaintiffs in this action, that you haven't been following my order. That order is a very temporary pause. It's called a TRO that tells the government you must discontinue this blanket freeze on spending. It appears to the judge that the government has not done that, and so the judge is now saying, you have an obligation to comply with my order immediately. You haven't done it. You need to do it now.
And Garrett, let me read to you directly from the order, which I just got my hands on as well as Joyce did. It says, persons who make private determinations of the law and refuse to obey an order generally risk criminal contempt, even if the order is ultimately ruled incorrect. Of course, Donald Trump has avoided any real penalties, even when he has been convicted in the past. And what he's doing, I think it's fair to say, is an absolute cornerstone of what he intended to do from day one when he got into office.
Yeah, Chris, I think that's exactly right. President Trump and his team had long expressed throughout the campaign that they were going to test the bounds of executive authority, and they want to do so in this case as well. Both he and Vice President Vance over the weekend made arguments to this effect, that they don't believe that a single district court judge, as this is in the district court in Rhode Island, I believe, specifically, should have this kind of authority, or does have this kind of authority, to make these kind of blanket statements about federal policy nationally, and they intend to challenge or push back against any specific judge making that order. This goes back to something J.D. Vance has talked about, sort of a throwback to Andrew Jackson, historically saying, you know, I've seen Justice Marshall's, I believe it's Justice Marshall's order, now let him enforce it. They believe the courts don't have the authority or the ability to hold their feet to the fire in this case, and they are spoiling for a fight. Democrats have looked at this and see a potential constitutional crisis on the horizon. But for now, I'll be very curious to see, and we have no reaction yet, I should be clear, from the Trump White House, given that this news has just broken in the last few minutes, how far they want to take this challenge, either up the ladder with the courts or by simply continuing to not comply.
Well, that's a key question, isn't it, Joyce, in terms of preserving the Constitution and recognizing that there are branches of government, and that's the democracy that we live in. How big is this moment potentially for a judge to say, I have told you what needs to be done. You need to do it.
Yeah, it's shocking that a federal judge would have to admonish the government like that. And there are two paths forward here, and one is very dramatic and perhaps potentially dangerous to democracy. The other is normal and realistic. The normal, realistic path is to appeal the judge's order, to try to get a higher court to reverse. Although in reality, this is a very short-term order because on February 21st, this judge will hold what's called a hearing into the preliminary injunction and let both parties put on evidence and decide what to do moving forward. The judge has also told the government that it's free to come back to him if they need a specific exemption from this order in order to pursue legitimate allegations of fraud and waste. This order tells the government it's unconstitutional to have a blanket freeze on spending that Congress has authorized, but if something specific comes up, come back to me. So that's the rule of law approach, the approach that we would expect to see the administration take. The lawless path is the path that we've increasingly seen the current vice president reference, this notion that you just don't have to obey orders from courts that you don't like.
So Trump and his cronies are snapping, and we're going to talk a bit about this later, but Donald is freaking out as he takes these big losses in court. And this is due to a couple things. One that really went under the radar, which is that Joe Biden was, in his 4 years, there's lots of criticisms you can make about Joe Biden, but one of the things he did was he put judges on the court. He put more judges on influential court positions. We know we only got one Supreme Court judge, but don't forget the lower courts and the appeals courts, right? The circuit courts. He put more judges on the court than any president in one term did. It's a historic achievement. And that will be a bulwark against Trump BS. But also, it's not just Biden judges. It's also Trump's own judges. Judges appointed by Bush. Judges appointed even by Reagan. Some of them they're very elderly, but they're still around. Have been standing up against him. And now the response is going to be very, very ugly. Because not only is Trump doing his tantrums, and we're going to talk about this in the coming hours and days and going forward, where you see Trump and his senatorial cronies and even his dumb VP, the real VP, the on-paper VP, J.D. Vance, not the actual VP Elon Musk, but Vance is saying that the president is effectively allowed to do whatever he wants, even if the courts say no, because he was elected to change things. This is going to get ugly. But one thing we can know for sure, Donald is furious because he did not expect these early losses in court.